Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Destiny Pharma PLC Annual General Meeting. Throughout this recorded meeting, attendees online will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab that's just situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Please just simply type in your questions and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question submitted today. However, all questions will be reviewed with responses published on the Investor Meet Company platform where it is appropriate to do so. I'll now like to hand you over to Chairman Nick Rogers. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to the annual general meeting of Destiny Pharma PLC. I'm Nick Rogers, as you've just been told, the chairman of the company, and I'll be chairing today's meeting. It's now just after 11 o'clock, and as we have a quorum, I declare the meeting open, and we can proceed to business. It's very pleasing to see that we have some shareholders online. We don't have any shareholders in the room, but thank you very much for those people who've taken the time to join this morning. Can I just turn to practicalities? Before we start the formal part of the meeting, I'd just like to mention a few housekeeping points. Please keep mobile phones off or switch to silent mode. I know that doesn't apply to people online, but it does in the room. And I'd like to remind people that we don't allow photographs to be taken or the meeting to be recorded other than by Investor Meet Company or transmitted. I'd now like to introduce the board who are here. So there's myself, there's Neil Clark, who's the Chief Executive, and Sean Claydon, who is the Finance Director, and we've got Peter, the Company Secretary, as well. Consistent with the approach that we've adopted in previous years, we will first turn to the formal business of the meeting and deal with the resolutions that have been set out in the notice of meeting. And then Neil is going to give a presentation on the group's activities. And following the conclusion of that presentation, there'll be time for Q&A for those online. And we'll try and answer all of those questions in the meeting. If not, as you said, we will deal with those outside the meeting. So if I can now start the formal proceedings of the meeting. The notice of annual general meeting, together with the explanatory notes, was posted to shareholders on the 27th of April. Accordingly, the requisite period has been given, and I propose that, with your consent, the notice of meeting should be taken as read. And if any shareholders online think I should read the notice, can they put a message in the chat box now? I'll wait a few moments for anybody to object. Okay, so I think that's agreed, and we can take the notice of meeting as read. Right, the voting procedures. To reflect the views of the shareholders of the company and in accordance with the company's Articles of Association, the voting on the resolutions today will be conducted by way of a poll rather than on a show of hands. This is seen as the best corporate governance practice, as it gives all shareholders the opportunity to participate in the decision-making of the company and have their votes recorded in proportion to the number of shares they hold. There are 7 resolutions to be put to the vote today, and we'll conduct a poll on each of the resolutions after the resolution has been put. We'll now proceed to the resolutions, which I formally propose to the meeting. The full text of each of the resolutions is set out in the notice of meeting, and a copy of which you've received. A summary of the resolutions is also on the screen for you, and I hope those people online can see it. So resolutions 1 to 6 up there are all ordinary resolutions and just require a simple majority, i.e. more than 50% of the shareholders voting for those resolutions to be passed. Resolution 7 is proposed as a special resolution and therefore requires 75% of the shareholders voting for that to be passed. And again, we're conducting a poll, as I've just said. So resolution 1, this is proposing to receive the audited accounts of the company for the year ended 31st of December 2021, together with the director's report and the auditor's report thereon. I propose that this resolution to the meeting. Those in favour? Those against? The resolution is therefore passed, and I think the proxies, Sean. So those in favour of resolution 1, 25,872,639 shares for, and 535 shares against, 494 shares withheld. So that I declare that resolution passed. Resolution 2, and I'm going to pass, this concerns my re-election, so I will pass to Neil to propose the resolution.
Yeah, this is to propose Nick Rogers, our chairman, to be re-elected as a director of the company. So those in favour, please raise your hands. Nick, you can't vote. And then the proxies, keep glasses on. Again, 25.8 million votes in favour, which is 99.9% of the shares cast, and 845 against, and 494 withheld. So resolution approved, carried.
Thank you. The third resolution involves the re-election of Sean Claydon as a director. I propose that Sean Claydon be re-elected as a director. Those in favour? Those against? And the proxy vote is as follows. 21,795,406 for, 845 votes against, and 4,077,417 votes withheld. So I declare that resolution passed. Resolution 4. Resolution 4 involves the appointment of Crowe UK PLC as the company's auditors. And I propose that resolution that Crowe be reappointed. Those in favour? Those against? And in terms of proxies, 25,872,239 for, 845 against, 494 withheld. I declare that resolution carried. Resolution 5, this is allowing the board to, or the audit committee of the board, to determine the auditor's resolution, and I propose that this resolution be adopted by the company. Those in favour? Those against? In terms of proxies, resolution 5, we have 25,872,639 again for the resolution, 535 against, and 494 withheld. I declare that resolution carried. So, resolution 6. This is to authorise the board to allot shares in the company and to grant rights to subscribe for or convert any security into shares in the company up to an aggregate nominal amount of 244,357.2p. This authority will expire on the 31st of August 2023 or earlier on the conclusion of the company's next AGM. I propose a resolution to the meeting. Those in favour? Those against? And in terms of the proxies, resolution 6, 25,871,791 for, 1,383 against, and 494 withheld. So I declare the resolution carried. Right, so that's the ordinary resolutions 1 to 6, all dealt with. Resolution 7 is a special resolution. This resolution proposes to authorise the directors to allot shares for cash without first offering them to existing shareholders in proportion to their existing shareholdings. The authority sought limits the maximum number of shares which can be allotted on this basis to an aggregate nominal value equal to £146,614.21, representing approximately 20% of the company's share capital in issue on the 26th of April 2020. This authority will expire as the authority in Resolution 6 on 31st of August 2023, or if earlier on the conclusion of the company's next AGM. I propose this resolution to the meeting. Those in favour? Those against? And in terms of proxies on Resolution 7, we have 21,794,868 votes in favour, 4,078,306 against, and 494 withheld. So I declare the resolution carried. Right, that concludes the formal business of the AGM. So I'll declare the meeting closed and hand across to Neil Clark to run through the company presentation.
Thank you, Nick. I was proposing to just go through the first slides in the presentation, take questions. We recently presented following the fundraising in March, a full company presentation. But if we can just, if I can take control, I think move through the slides. And as you know, Destiny Pharma is dedicated to developing new treatments that prevent infections, and we have a late stage pipeline and some very exciting earlier assets as well. Moving through the disclaimer, in terms of a summary, as we said, we're still committed to bringing forward new treatments, preventative treatments to stop infections. Where we sit now today at FinCap on Nomad, we look across at St Bartholomew's Hospital, and no doubt, unfortunately, there are people in there now who are being treated for serious infections, both of which potentially could have been prevented by our two lead candidates. One of which is to prevent a nasty gut infection caused by a toxic bacteria, Clostridioides difficile, or toxic strains of that bacteria. But also we have our long-standing XS73 nasal program to prevent nasal decolonization, to decolonize the nose to stop the nasal carriage of Staph aureus causing post-surgical infections such as MRSA. But these are both large opportunities with billion-dollar markets to aim for, and very attractive commercial opportunities, but also very clear clinical opportunities. The clinical world needs new treatments in this space. We've got a good track record since the IPO. I know shareholders, long-standing shareholders, some of whom may take a slightly different view in terms of the pace of progress. We have been slower in some cases, but we've been very successful in delivering positive results across the board in our pipeline. And that's not always the case in these life science clinical stage companies, but we've got a great track record to date, and we're looking forward as we move forward with all of our assets to further success. And a key part of that, as we said at the recent fundraising, was partnering. Our strategy is to partner our assets for phase 3 studies and commercialization. We have very active programs, especially with M3, our lead asset, to prevent the recurrence of Clostridioides difficile infections. But also we're building the process for our second asset, XS73 nasal. And partnering news, we know, is something that investors, shareholders are waiting for, and we're working very hard to deliver that. And obviously, as soon as deals are closed, we will announce them. The model, though, is still lean. You'll see we've expanded. A very strong Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Yuri Martina, joined us in May. So earlier this month, actually, he was with us the last 2 days at our Brighton office, and it's really great to have him on board full time. Obviously, as a clinical company, that's really important. And also, you'll see yesterday we announced that we've expanded and strengthened the board with additional non-execs, which again means that the board is also fit for purpose as we look to deliver on our strategy. So moving on to the next slide, which covers actually those appointments. Apologies, I should have come to this. You'll see there the names there. Of course, if there are any questions, please put them into the system. And then the backdrop, I think, as I said, the backdrop of infections, infection prevention. If we don't understand the importance now with the awful coronavirus pandemic, then we never will. Terrible healthcare costs, terrible economic costs. Stopping infections is a no-brainer, and Destiny Pharma is at the forefront of several biotechs, especially that are bringing forward new treatments in this neglected area. But also we're looking to address the other global threat of antimicrobial resistance and superbugs, where old antibiotics are beginning to fail because the bacteria are very smart, very clever, and they can are becoming resistant. So that means those treatments are failing. And Destiny Pharma is at the forefront of bringing forward new products that address this threat across the board of increased infections and poor treatments. In terms of the pipeline, again, a very familiar slide to some of you. In orange, we have our two biotherapeutic assets. So this is Destiny Pharma moving into this area of the microbiome, whereby we're harnessing naturally occurring attributes of bacteria to deliver medicines. This is a very exciting area of life science, and these two orange assets really were not there at the IPO. We bought the M3 asset in November, December 2020, and the Sporgov collaboration with Sporgen in September 2020. But what it has done, of course, is diversified our technology base. We're very happy with our XF platform and our assets that are moving forward there, but also we have this diversification. So again, diversification in a risky area like drug development is important. We have excellent diversification across our pipeline, but also, of course, we have two late-stage assets which are from two different technologies. M3 is a naturally occurring safe spore of Clostridioides difficile, which has been through very successful phase 2 studies, heading towards phase 3, obviously looking for partners. But also we have XS73 nasal, which is coming from more classical organic chemistry biotechnology approach, which again has finished very successful phase 2 data last year. You will remember, excellent data. And again, we're finalising plans there for the phase 3s and moving forward then with partnering to get that moving towards phase 3s. And the earlier pipeline is also bubbling away nicely. More news to come there, hopefully in the later this year. But the key news, obviously, is on those two lead programs, partnering for M3, starting the clinical study, and securing regulatory clarity on XS73 nasal. And there's some good progress being made there. Of course, it's great to have Yuri now as our Chief Medical Officer leading those clinical activities. I was going to stop there rather than go into detail on the two programs. Happy to take questions. Obviously on the pipeline, and I'm sure address my colleagues any strategic questions. So I was going to hand back now to the Q&A and to the Investor Meet team, who no doubt can either highlight any questions we have and we can respond to them.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Neil. As you can see, there's a number of questions that we've received from investors online this morning. And firstly, thank you to all of those that have taken the time to submit those questions this morning. If I may just hand back to you, if I could ask you just to read out any of these questions where you feel it's appropriate and that you can give a response to, and then we'll pick up from you at the end. Okay, Peter could just scroll down as I answer. So there's a question here regarding, are we concerned that a US pharma company may buy us at a low valuation? I don't think we're concerned. It's not something we're currently engaged in. We are well connected with US banks and other companies, but it's not something that the company is targeting. And obviously, low valuation is something we look at, and we're very disappointed in the valuation. But it's a very tough market out there, as we know, whether it's the biotech sector specifically or global concerns. And we're in a very strong position with a solid cash position, cash for over a year, and late-stage assets. And the board is fully focused on delivering value. And no doubt that we will be networking with companies in Europe, US, and elsewhere. But our number one strategy is to deliver on a partnering deal for C. diff, for M3, and clarify the regulatory position for XS73 nasal. We're not at the moment on the road looking for M&A deals.
And I think Neil, can I just sort of say also, I mean, we've got long-term shareholders who invested very recently at 50p. And previously also at higher level. They're backing us for the long term. They're backing us to execute on our strategy. So unless they want to run for the hills and take a cheap price, we don't expect them to sell out very soon.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here regarding cash position. Do we envisage raising further cash in the coming year? Well, I think at the moment we'd say no, because we're looking to deliver news flow regarding partnering and regulatory clarity. But of course, as a listed biotechnology company, it's not unusual in the future, I'm not saying within the next 12 months, that we would consider additional financings. But obviously what we need to do with the money we have is to deliver on some of those key targets and look at strategically where the company wants to go. But currently there's no plans in the next 12 months to raise any money. There's a question here regarding regulatory discussions on XS73 with the European Medicines Agency, but I'll also broaden that to the FDA, the American agency, and there are ongoing communications. And when we have clarity on the phase 3 plans in both of those territories, as it were, we will announce them. But there's obviously it's not every day that we have communications. There's a set process here, but we are in active discussions with both agencies. And also, as I said, Dr. Martina is now leading that, and we will give further updates in the next few months as we get clarity on the positioning of both of those important regulatory bodies. There's a question on the commercial potential for XS73. Well, this is, I mean, since the IPO back in 2017, we've been fairly consistent on the opportunity, a larger opportunity in America where there's no approved treatment for nasal decolonization with sensible pricing. The market size is driven by the number of operations, where approximately a third of patients are at risk of a post-surgical Staphylococcus aureus infection because they're carriers in the nose. So in our room here today in London, a third of us would be carriers. We have a 10 times greater risk of a post-surgical infection. So unfortunately, or fortunately, in some cases, there are tens of millions of patients going for operations in the US alone who are at risk of these post-surgical infections. Depending on our market penetration, we can see a very attractive market opportunity, peak sales potentially of $1 billion, so that's sales, due to us sort of bringing forward a new treatment that can do what it says on the tin, what it did in the phase 2, which is basically to decolonize the nose in 24 hours with 4 to 5 doses. So a patient will go into that operation with almost no Staphylococcus aureus in their nose, and therefore reducing the chance of a post-surgical post-surgical infection. In terms of timescale for a partnering deal, well, we'd like to close a deal for M3 this year. Obviously, we will see if we can do that, but that's the target. I comment here on the recent fundraising, so I'll just read it through. It's quite a long question. Well, I think in terms of commercial forecasts that were given to new shareholders, they were consistent with everything else we've shared in external markets. There was no, obviously, that advised by our Nomad and lawyers. There was no information given to new shareholders that wasn't either announced at the time of the funding to the markets, or was public anyway. And definitely, I don't recall us getting into any new information regarding commercial forecasts. NTCDM3 is our lead asset. I wouldn't necessarily say it's overtaken XS73 because when we acquired NTCDM3, it already completed its phase 2 clinical studies, whereas XS73 completed its phase 2 almost a year later. So effectively, it still is a year ahead. We have that regulatory clarity on the phase 3 studies we need to do. XS73, we're just catching up. So yes, it is our lead asset, which is why it's at the top of the pipeline. And then says, why is commercial progress on XS73 slow? Yes, I accept that people may say that it's slow to move forward to getting clarity on the phase 3 studies and obviously then partnering, but it's taken time. And the area we're in here with XS73, it's anti-infectives. The regulators, the FDA and EMA have slightly different approaches, so it does take time. And I wouldn't say we've necessarily been slow. There's been the regulatory bodies across the sector have been slowed by COVID-19, and phase 2 results were excellent, are still excellent. And we will, as I said, deliver the clarity on the phase 3 studies through our ongoing discussions and then start an active partnering program. I don't quite know, people comment here about a legacy asset. No, it's an active asset, and we're very excited still about its potential. There's a comment here regarding forthcoming trials. I think in terms of questions on superiority, non-inferiority, etc., standard care, these are good questions, but we won't answer those now. We will come back when we have clarity from the regulatory authorities, and we will get our medic, Dr. Yuri Martina, to lead that discussion. And we'll look forward to plan for a very detailed discussion on what we will announce, hopefully in the next few months, on XS73 clinical plans. We've already been fairly clear, I think, on M3 in the past. In terms of the US presence, yes, we are obviously post lockdowns. We're increasing activity over in the States, be it visiting manufacturers, potential partners, or indeed the investment community. It's it takes time, but we do have connections there. And in due course, I'm sure we will have a more active US presence, especially if we're up and running with a phase 3 study or 2 phase 3 studies. We will have boots on the ground, I'm sure, in the US, but it won't be this year. And in terms of phase 3 studies in the US and Europe, haven't started yet. They won't start until we get a partner, and that potentially could be next year. In terms of starting studies, we're obviously going to close the partnering deal this year and then start studies next year. There's a question here regarding the detail of M3 in terms of, I guess, toxic strains becoming resistant to a new variant of C. diff that will be able to become resistant to M3. Well, the nature of M3 is, of course, it's a naturally occurring strain of C. difficile, so it's non-toxic. So the concept is that it kicks out the toxic strains from the environmental niche, and especially the colon, so it pushes them out of the way like a sort of garden ground cover and stops it establishing itself. And of course, if a toxic strain of C. diff is established in your gut, the toxins then disrupt the lining, very nasty. You can have holes in the epithelium, and it leads to severe episodes of diarrhea, but in some cases death. So we're not a drug, so we're not necessarily, this is where we do address antimicrobial resistance with M3, because we're not an antibiotic here. It's a naturally occurring vehicle to kick out the toxic strains and replace it with a non-toxic strain. So again, gives us, we think, a real comfort that if there are different toxic strains of C. diff, M3, as it's shown in the past in studies, can act across the board and stop them becoming established, and therefore stop this recurrence of toxic strains of C. diff. So yes, Sporkov, well, yes, it's progressing well, and I think we have a partner there, and we're completing the grant work currently. And as I've said before, when we have news and we finish all of the studies, we will look to give an update to the market. But we have a 50-50 collaboration here with a company called Sporgen, and have other partners in that collaboration, and we have to coordinate announcements with them, and also with potentially with their academic publications as well. But we are excited about the way the project's gone, and also looking forward to having news soon on possible next steps as it moves forward. There's a question here: is the board considering a Nasdaq listing? Well, I think yes, it's discussed, and we'll look at that. But we also need to be realistic about where we are, market cap, and the markets in the US. But definitely, we have the assets to find a very sort of good home on Nasdaq. But also, we'd like to have more support and a better profile on London AIM. So we work hard with London investors, European investors, to increase our profile. But definitely, it's I think any executive in any life science company, private or public, on London AIM, they will all be looking at a Nasdaq listing, because in some cases the valuations, etc., can be very attractive. But there's also many examples, and I'm sure our name who are with us today can refer to them, that there are many examples of companies that have struggled on going onto Nasdaq. So it's not the streets of New York aren't paved with gold. AMR Action Fund, yes, we've seen them make their first investments, and we have been in touch with them, and we will continue to communicate with them and other specialist investors in this space.
Any idea why they're moving so slow?
They are, yeah, they have moved slowly, but they are beginning to move. So I think I think that they're looking to do a great job. It does help. I noticed they were mentioned at a WHO meeting recently, where they were very positive compliments on their involvement, because obviously it's potentially a large amount of money coming into this space. There's other initiatives that are going on. The UK government has a trial to support the commercial rollout of really sort of, these are antibiotics, anti-infectives, but there's a lot going on in the background to help support companies in this space. But also, I'd like to say that our products, our drugs, and indeed our M3, our naturally occurring treatment, they stand alone as great products. Yes, we welcome grant support and regulatory support, but the fact is they're very good, well-defined products for largely hospital markets. So we mustn't forget that. We're not, we are delivering, we believe, very attractive clinical and commercial treatments. I think I'll move on from that question. There's a question regarding Bactroban, which I'm afraid we haven't got the information to hand to comment on that. A question here on comment for board appointments. Well, just briefly, as people may know, China Medical Systems invested in the company at the IPO and subsequently, so they approximately their holdings across their two funds. I think it's around 10%, Sean, and they have the rights for a board seat. And Dr. YJ Penn, who's been very supportive for many years, he's expanded his team, and we now have his colleague James Stearns joining. We still have very good relations with them, and that's a bit of a transition. And then the other two appointments, obviously Peter Morgan, who's been a long-standing director of Destiny Pharma, retired, and we took the opportunity to look at new candidates, and the board, through a process, selected two, and also their details are public. So I think it's as always.
I think we were looking for expertise which wasn't currently on the board or wasn't represented well enough. Things like deal doing, things like US experience, things like that. So we have got that in those individuals, those new individuals who joined the board, and that's really helpful. Helping go forward.
I think that's the last question. Sorry, I sort of rattled through those, but
That's great. Neil, Sean, Nick, thank you very much indeed for your presentation and for addressing all of those questions that came in from investors this morning. And of course, if there are any further questions submitted today, we'll make these available to you immediately after the presentation has ended for your review. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll publish all those responses where it's appropriate to do so on the Investor Meet Company platform. Nick, perhaps for redirecting those online to provide you with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to yourselves and the company, if I could please just ask you for a few closing comments to wrap up with, that'd be great.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much for your questions. Those people who have asked questions, very useful, and we appreciate your questions. We're not being at all defensive. So we're going to make a statement after the AGM. So I thought it would be sensible to read it out to you as we're going to do it in a minute or two. So what I'm going to say publicly is that Destiny Pharma is in a very strong position, as you've heard from Neil, having two late-stage assets that both have delivered excellent phase 2 data. You saw that with XF73 earlier on last year, and they're derived from two totally different technologies. So the risk diversification in this company is very good, and the existing robust data sets us very much apart in biotechnology businesses, in my experience. We're on track to achieve our key strategic targets for our two lead programs, XF73 nasal and M3. Discussions are ongoing with the US and EU regulatory authorities, as we've just said, which will allow us to finalize those phase 3 plans for XF73. And as soon as we've got those, then we will publicly announce those. The active discussions that you've heard about regarding the out-licensing of our lead M3 asset are progressing well, and as Neil has said, we hope to make some announcements later on this year in regard to that. Again, Neil has mentioned that we've appointed a new chief medical officer, and he has started very much and adding his expertise and his knowledge to our team. That's really helpful at the stage we're at. And we've also expanded the board skills, and we've explained why that's been important. So in terms of the financial markets and the macro backdrop, this is particularly difficult, and it has been particularly difficult for the first part of this year. But we're in a strong position, particularly after raising some money earlier in the year, to deliver on this strategy and develop our novel products that prevent serious infections. And we look forward to delivering further progress and announcing that later on this year. Thank you very much for your attendance and your interest in the business. I think that's the end of the meeting.
That's great, and thank you very much indeed to the board for updating attendees today. Could I please ask attendees online not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the board can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the board of Destiny Pharma PLC, we would like to thank you for attending today's annual general meeting, and good afternoon to you all.
Just shuffle your